The 1st of March arrived not with the roar of a lion, but with the quiet, stubborn persistence of melting slush. Valen stood by his window, watching the gray sky. On his desk lay a small twist of red and white wool, a martinitsa. In his culture, it was a symbol of health and the coming spring, but to him, it felt like a heavy anchor. He ran his thumb over the intertwined threads, remembering the promise that winter would eventually end, even when his heart felt perpetually frozen. He stepped out into the city, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Everywhere he looked, the world was adorned in red and white. Vendors on street corners sold tassels and braided bracelets, and almost every passerby wore the colors of Baba Marta pinned to their lapels. Valen walked with his chin tucked into his collar, feeling like a ghost moving through a festival of life. To everyone else, this day was a celebration of survival. To him, it was a countdown he wasn't ready to start. His feet led him toward the park, the place where the transition of seasons always felt most raw. The trees were still skeletal, their branches dark and wet against the pale sky. He reached the wooden bench where the snow had finally retreated, leaving behind only patches of flattened brown grass. This was where he and Alara had sat a year ago, mocking the cold and dreaming of the warmth that was supposedly just around the corner. Closing his eyes, Valen let the memory wash over him. Alara had been sitting there, her cheeks bitten pink by the wind, her fingers busy with a ball of crimson yarn and a spool of white silk. She had been laughing, telling him the old stories of Baba Marta, how the grumpy old woman of March would only smile when she saw the red and white threads. They were 18, and the idea of new beginnings felt like a given, a natural law they would always benefit from. Alara had reached for his hand that day, her touch warmer than the winter sun. She tied a martinitsa around his wrist, the red representing the blood of life, and the white representing the purity of the melting snow. "You have to wear it until you see the first sign of spring, Valen," she had whispered, her eyes shining with a secret hope. "The moment you see a bud or a stork, you tie it to a tree and leave your wishes there. That's how we let the winter go." A sharp gust of wind pulled him back to the present. Valen looked down at his wrist. He was still wearing that same martinitsa, though the white had turned gray and the red had faded to a dull rust. He hadn't been able to take it off last year. He had missed the storks. He had ignored the budding flowers. To take it off felt like admitting that Alara was part of the winter that had passed, rather than the spring he was supposed to enter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph of her, the edges soft from being carried too long. He looked from the photo to the bare, shivering branches of the plum tree nearby. The tradition demanded a release. Baba Marta didn't accept those who clung to the frost. He felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken words and the silence of a future that had changed shape without his permission. As he leaned closer to the tree, intending to turn away, he saw it. Tucked beneath a layer of frost-tipped bark was a single tiny green bud no larger than a bead. It was a defiant spark of life in a world of gray. It was the sign he had been avoiding for an entire year. The world was moving on, and the branch beneath his fingers was pulsing with the slow, steady rhythm of a new season. With trembling fingers, Valen finally untied the faded martinitsa from his wrist. It felt lighter than it ever had before. He reached up and looped the threads around the branch, right next to the tiny bud. "For health," he whispered, "and for the courage to let the snow melt." He wasn't leaving Alara behind. He was planting the memory of her in the bloom of the tree, allowing her to become part of the spring instead of the cold. The clouds broke for a moment, letting a thin ribbon of sunlight touch the park. Valen turned and began to walk back toward the city. His wrist felt strangely bare, but his chest felt a little less tight. Behind him, the red and white tassels danced in the wind, a small splash of color against the waking woods. He was 18, and for the first time in a year, he felt like he was walking toward the sun rather than away from the shadows.